The sun beat down mercilessly on the lone figure, trudging through the desert sands. Kedar's shoulders slumped beneath the weight of shame rather than any physical burden. Behind him, the magnificent walls of Zarahm rose like a mirage, the city that had been his prison now forever closed to him. 40 years of service ended with 6 brutal words. "You are worthless. Leave our sight." Lead trickled from the fresh brand on his shoulder, the mark of banishment. His parched lips cracked as he whispered a prayer to gods who had never answered. The distant sound of running footsteps barely registered until a child's voice pierced the haze of his despair. "Where are you going, Dad?" The words froze him in place. How could this child know the secret he had guarded with his life now exposed by 3 simple words? What terrible fate awaits a slave who dared father a child with nobility? Kedar stood frozen, the child's words hanging in the desert air. Her small face, framed by dark curls, held his own features in miniature. The resemblance was unmistakable to anyone who might see them together. "Go back," he commanded, his voice hoarse. "You cannot follow me. Mother said I would find you here." The girl clutched a small carved wooden bird. "She said to give you this." The sight of the wooden talisman brought memories flooding back. 40 years of servitude compressed into flashes of remembrance. He had carved it for Samira during stolen moments in the palace gardens. Lady Samira, daughter of the Emperor's most trusted advisor, had been forbidden to him in every way imaginable. "Your mother," he began, then faltered. "What has happened to her?" The bad man took her away. Tears welled in the child's eyes. "She told me to run to the servants' quarter and find the man with kind eyes who tends the eastern gardens." Kedar knelt, wincing as his knees cracked against the hard-packed sand. His calloused hand, marked by decades of labor, reached tentatively toward the girl's cheek. "What is your name, child?" "Nora," she answered. "Mother said it means light." Light. The one thing his life had lacked in the shadowed existence of slavery. Vizier Maktar's words echoed in his mind. 40 years you have served, and what use have you been? An aging gardener with nothing to show but dirt beneath his nails and a back too bent for proper work. The vizier had always despised him, watching with narrowed eyes whenever Kedar worked the gardens near Lady Samira's chambers. Had he somehow discovered their secret? The thought chilled him more than the approaching desert night. "We must move quickly," he said, rising. "It is not safe." "Where will we go?" Nura asked, small fingers clutching his rough-spun sleeve. "Away from here, as far as these old legs will carry us." The brand on his shoulder throbbed. The mark of banishment burned into his flesh. Mere hours ago, any who saw it would know him as outcast, forbidden to return to Zarahm upon pain of death. And now, with this child, this impossible, miraculous child, his situation had become infinitely more dangerous. They walked until the moon rose high, Nura's steps growing heavier with each passing hour. Finally, Kedar lifted her onto his back, her small arms wrapping around his neck as she drifted to sleep. In the distance, the glow of Zaraham's torches dimmed. He had tended those walls for decades, nurturing the climbing vines that softened the harsh stone. The only home he had known since being taken as a boy from. The memory slipped away, as it always did. His life before servitude remained a hazy dream, fragments that disappeared upon waking. "I will keep you safe," he whispered to the sleeping child. The words felt foreign on his tongue, a promise he had no right to make, yet one he would die fulfilling. Dawn broke across the dunes, painting them gold and amber. Kedar had walked through the night, his worn sandals leaving tracks that would soon be erased by the desert wind. He had nothing but the clothes on his back, a small water skin, and now this child who called him father. As the sun climbed higher, Nura stirred against his shoulder. "The bad man is coming," she murmured sleepily. Kedar turned, squinting toward the city. In the distance, a plume of dust rose, riders moving fast across the desert floor. "How did you know?" he asked, setting her down gently. Nura shrugged, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I just know things sometimes. Mother said it was a gift." Kedar felt a chill despite the growing heat. The vizier would not have sent riders unless he knew about Nura, which meant Samira had likely paid the ultimate price for their forbidden love. "We must find shelter," he said, scanning the horizon. "The desert will kill us before midday." Nura pointed to the southeast, where the dunes gave way to rocky outcroppings. "Mother showed me maps. Nomads camp there when the dry season comes." Kedar looked at his daughter with new eyes. What other knowledge did this child possess? And what would the vizier do to possess it or destroy it? "Then we go there," he decided, "and pray the Barik tribe is feeling merciful to strangers." As they walked, Kedar felt something he had not experienced in decades, the stirring of hope, fragile as a desert bloom. The sun climbed mercilessly overhead, a blazing eye that watched their slow progress across the shifting sands. Kedar's throat had dried to parchment, each swallow painful. The water skin hung nearly empty at his side. "Are you thirsty?" he asked, noticing Nura's chapped lips. She nodded reluctantly. "A little." He handed her the water skin. "Small sips. Make it last." Nura drank carefully, then tried to return it. Kedar pushed it back gently. "Keep it. I drank at dawn." The lie came easily. He had not touched their water since the previous evening, saving every precious drop for the child. "Will the bad men catch us?" Nura asked, her dark eyes scanning the horizon where heat rippled like water. "They are riders. They must follow the hard ground or risk their horses." Kedar pointed to the sea of dunes before them. "We will go where horses cannot." It was a gamble. The deeper desert offered protection from pursuit, but presented dangers of its own. Without shelter or additional water, they would not survive more than a day. "Tell me about my mother," Nura said, as they trudged forward. "She never spoke much about you." Kedar's heart twisted. "To protect us both, I imagine." He chose his words carefully, uncertain how much a child should hear. "Your mother was like water in the desert, precious and life-giving. She would read in the garden, where I worked. And sometimes we would speak of poetry and distant lands. Did you love her?" "Very much," he answered, surprised by his willingness to admit it aloud after so many years of silence. "Though loving her was forbidden, because you were a slave," the directness of childhood. "Yes, and because she was nobility, promised to another." Nora considered this, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "But she loved you anyway, so it seems." He glanced at the child walking beside him, living proof of that forbidden love. They crested a dune, and Kedar's heart sank. The rocky outcroppings were still distant shimmers on the horizon. They would not reach them before nightfall. "We will rest here," he decided, finding a hollow on the leeward side of the dune. "The sun is too strong now." He removed his outer robe, stretching it between his staff and a stunted desert bush to create a small tent of shade. They huddled beneath it, the sand still hot beneath them. "Look," Kedar said, distracting Nura from their discomfort. He pointed to tiny tracks in the sand. "Desert mice. They burrow deep where it's cool during the day. Are they clever?" "The cleverest of desert creatures. They find water where none seems to exist." As the worst heat of the day passed, Kedar taught Nura to identify the sparse life of the desert, the plants that stored water, the insects that appeared at dusk, the distant cry of a hunting bird. "When the stars come, I will show you how to find your way," he promised. The desert sky is a map that never changes. Night fell swiftly, the temperature dropping with alarming speed. Kedar wrapped Nura in his robe, holding her close for warmth. Above them the heavens blazed with countless stars. "That bright one," he pointed, "is the desert queen. Follow her light and you will always find water eventually. And those three in a row are the wanderer's belt." "Did you learn this as a boy?" Nura asked, her voice sleep. The question stirred something in the depths of Kedar's memory. A tall man with his same dark eyes, pointing to these same stars. "I think I did, before I was taken." "Taken where?" "To Zarahm. To serve. His memory supplied no more, just fragments running across sand, screams, the clash of metal, then darkness. Nura was quiet for so long he thought she had fallen asleep. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry they hurt you." He tightened his arm around her small shoulders. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we reach the rocks." Dawn broke with a distant sound that pulled Kedar from uneasy dreams. He rose carefully, not waking Nura, and climbed to the dune's crest. His heart froze. On the horizon, moving steadily closer, was a line of mounted soldiers. Somehow they had tracked them through the dunes. As he watched, the riders split into two groups, circling to trap them between their forces. "Nura," he called urgently, sliding back down the dune, "we must move. Now." She woke instantly, alert to the fear in his voice. "They found us?" He nodded grimly. "Gathering their few possessions. They have divided their forces. We must reach the rocks before they close their trap." They abandoned all caution, no longer conserving strength, but racing against time and the approaching hunters. The water skin, nearly empty now, bounced against Kedar's hip, a constant reminder of their precarious survival. They reached the rocky outcropping as the sun reached its zenith. Kedar's lungs burned, and Nura stumbled beside him, exhaustion etched on her small face. The pursuit had fallen back, but remained visible, dark specks against the golden horizon. There, Nura pointed to a narrow cleft between towering stone formations. "We can hide." The passage twisted through the rocks, opening suddenly into a sheltered valley. Kedar stopped abruptly, his arms sweeping out to protect Nura. Before them stood a camp of the Barik nomads. 20 tents arranged in a crescent, colorful fabrics, stark against the desert stone. A dozen men with curved blades moved swiftly to surround them. "Stay behind me," Kedar whispered, raising empty hands. "We seek refuge," he called in the desert tongue, the language coming to his lips from somewhere deep in memory. A tall man with a scarred face stepped forward. "Zarahm slaves have no place among the free people." He spat on the ground. "Your brand marks you, city dweller." "They hunt us," Kedar indicated the distant riders. "A child's life is at stake." The nomad's eyes shifted to Nura, who peered around Kedar's leg. Murmurs rippled through their ranks. "The child has desert blood," an elderly woman observed, approaching with a walking stick. Her eyes, clouded with age, seemed to see more than the others. "But you," she studied Kedar, "you are far from home, son of Kedar." The name struck Kedar like a physical blow. "What did you call me? You do not remember?" "The Empire takes more than freedom, it steals memory." The old woman tapped her temple. "I am Zara, elder of the Barik. I knew your father before the fall of Akhet." Akhet. The word echoed in the empty chambers of Kedar's past. Images flashed, stone walls rising from desert sands, markets filled with spices, a temple with 7 spires. "I was born a slave," he said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "You were born the son of Kedar, war chief of Akhet, last free city to stand against Zaraham's empire." Zara's voice carried across the silent camp. "You were taken when the city fell, a child of 10 summers." The nomads stirred uneasily. A younger man spoke up. "Mother, the riders approach. If they are imperial soldiers, they are the vizier's men," Nura said suddenly. The camp fell silent, all eyes turning to her. "They want to take me back because of what I can do." "And what can you do, little desert flower?" Zara asked gently. Before Nura could answer, a commotion erupted from the edge of the camp. A wild desert hare, injured and panicked, had bounded into the settlement. It darted between legs and tents, pursued by laughing children. Nura stepped away from Kedar's protection, kneeling as the creature approached. To everyone's astonishment, the hare slowed, then hopped directly to her outstretched hands. "He's afraid," she said simply, stroking his ears. "His leg hurts." The camp fell silent. Even the children stopped their chase, watching wide-eyed as the wild creature allowed Nura to examine its wounded limb. "The desert speaks to her," Zara said, her voice filled with wonder. As it once spoke to the ancient ones. The scarred man frowned. It changes nothing. The Empire's reach is long. Harboring their fugitives brings death. They are not the Empire's, Zara countered. This man is Barik by blood, if not by memory. And the child, she studied Nura with her clouded eyes. The child is something more. A young scout rushed into the camp. Riders, a dozen men approaching the eastern passage. The scarred man, evidently the war chief, barked orders. Warriors moved to defensive positions, while women gathered children. "What will you do with us?" Kedar asked, acutely aware of the danger he had brought to these people. Zara reached into her robes and withdrew a medallion, bronze, etched with the symbol of a rising sun. "This belonged to your father. He gave it to me for safekeeping, should his son ever return." Kedar took it, the metal warm against his palm. Something stirred in his blood, recognition beyond memory. "My father died defending Eket, as did your mother and 2 sisters. Zara's words were gentle but unflinching. "You alone survived, though the Empire tried to bury your identity beneath servitude." The war chief returned, tension evident in his stance. "We have minutes at most." "Arm him," Zara commanded, pointing to Kedar. "Blood remembers what the mind forgets." "He is a gardener, not a warrior," the chief protested. "He is Kedar's. Give him a blade and we shall see what 40 years of slavery has buried." The chief hesitated, then unsheathed a curved sword from his belt, offering it hilt first to Kedar. Kedar's hand closed around the weapon. Its weight felt strangely familiar, like greeting an old friend after a long absence. "Take the child to the hidden caves," Zara instructed a young woman. "We will deal with the Empire's dogs." "No," Nura said firmly, the hair still cradled in her arms. "I stay with my father." Kedar looked down at the sword in his hand, then to the child who had turned his world upside down in a single day. Something awakened in him, something the Empire had failed to extinguish despite decades of servitude. "Together then," he said, "but you stay behind the warriors. Promise me." She nodded solemnly as war cries echoed from the rocks beyond. The clash of steel rang through the narrow canyon as the vizier's men descended upon the nomad camp. Kedar stood with the Barik warriors, the unfamiliar weight of the sword growing more natural with each passing moment. "Stay back," he urged Nura, who huddled with the women behind a row of tents. The first Imperial soldier appeared at the canyon entrance, resplendent in the crimson and gold of Zarahm. The sight of those colors which had dominated Kedar's existence for 40 years sent a surge of unexpected anger through his veins. "Surrender the slave and the child," the captain called. "By order of Vizier Maktar." "There are no slaves here," the scarred war chief replied. "Only free men of the desert." The captain's eyes narrowed as he spotted Kedar. "The gardener plays warrior now. Step aside, tribesman. Our quarrel is not with the Barik yet." Kedar felt the eyes of the nomads upon him. These people owed him nothing, yet they stood ready to fight for a man who, until moments ago, had not known his own heritage. "What became of Lady Samara?" Kedar called, stepping forward. A cruel smile twisted the captain's features. "The traitor received a traitor's death at dawn." The vizier was most thorough in extracting her confession. The world seemed to slow around Kedar. Samara gone, the woman who had brought light to his shadowed existence, who had gifted him with a daughter against all odds. "And now he sends you for the child," Kedar said, his voice hollow. "The half-breed abomination poses a threat to the Empire." The captain's hand moved to his sword, though the vizier's interest in her is curious indeed. The first soldier charged without warning. Kedar raised his blade instinctively, decades of dormant muscle memory surging to life. Steel met steel, with a shower of sparks. His body moved of its own accord, parrying, sidestepping, countering with a precision that left the nomads staring in amazement. The soldier fell, clutching a wound that Kedar had no conscious memory of delivering. "Blood remembers," Sarah murmured from behind the line of defenders. More soldiers poured into the canyon, the air filled with battle cries and the ring of blades. Kedar fought alongside the Barik as though he had trained with them for years, his movements fluid despite decades of bending over palace gardens. Through the chaos, he caught glimpses of Noura, her eyes wide as she watched her father transformed from humble slave to warrior. The sight kept him fighting. When his aging muscles began to burn with exertion, fire arrows arced over the defenders, igniting two tents. Women rushed to extinguish the flames, while children scattered for safety. In the confusion, 3 soldiers broke through the defensive line, heading directly for where Noura stood. "Father," she cried out, backing away from the approaching men. Kedar tried to reach her, but 2 soldiers blocked his path. He dispatched one with a swift strike, but knew he would not reach her in time. Then, something extraordinary happened. As a soldier lunged for Noura, the campfire beside her erupted. Flames leapt impossibly high, forming a barrier between the child and her attackers. The soldiers recoiled, their faces masks of terror. "Which child?" one gasped. The flames twisted and danced, moving contrary to the wind, moving it seemed at Noura's command. Her small face was transfixed, eyes reflecting the supernatural fire that protected her. Zara pushed through the combatants, an ancient scroll clutched in her gnarled hands. "The prophecy," she breathed. "It is she." The imperial soldiers, witnessing the unnatural fire, began to retreat. Captain barked orders, trying to maintain discipline, but the sight of flames obeying a child had shattered their resolve. "This isn't over," the captain snarled as he backed away. "The vizier will hear of this sorcery." When the last soldier had fled, Kedar rushed to Noura, who stood trembling beside the now ordinary campfire. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling before her. She shook her head, tears streaming down her dust-streaked face. "I didn't mean to. The fire, it listened to me." Kedar enfolded her in his arms, feeling her small body shake with sobs. "It's all right," he whispered, though nothing felt right about what he had witnessed. Zara approached slowly, the scroll still clutched in her hands. "The child of 2 worlds," she said. "Desert blood and imperial blood mingled. The prophecy speaks of such a one." "What prophecy?" Kedar demanded. The old woman unrolled the ancient parchment. "When the empire's shadow is longest, a child born of sand and stone shall command the elements. Through this child, the chains of tyranny shall be broken." The war chief, bleeding from a cut above his eye, scoffed. "Children's tales. Tell that to the imperial dogs who just fled from a little girl." Zara countered. She fixed her clouded eyes on Kedar. "Your daughter is more than she appears, as are you, son of Kedar." Kedar looked down at the sword in his hand, now stained with blood. "I am a gardener," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "You were never just a gardener," Zara replied. "The Empire may have buried your past, but they could not erase the warrior in your blood." She gestured to the bodies of fallen soldiers. "Today proves that." Noura's small hand slipped into his. "Mother said we would find our people in the desert." Our people. The phrase stirred something deep within Kedar, a sense of belonging he had never known in 4 decades of servitude. "We cannot stay," the war chief interrupted. "They will return with greater numbers. We must break camp before nightfall." Zara nodded gravely. "The lost city. It is the only place the Empire fears to tread." "Lost city?" Kedar asked. "Akhet," she replied. "Your birthplace, your inheritance." 3 days of hard travel through the deepest desert brought them to a place where the dunes gave way to a vast expanse of stone, a plateau split by a deep ravine. The nomads moved with practiced efficiency, their caravan of camels and goats leaving minimal traces of their passage. Kedar rode beside Zara, Noura dozing against his chest in the pre-dawn chill. The old woman had spent their journey recounting tales of Akhet, the free city that had stood defiant against Zaraham's empire for generations. "There," Zara pointed, as they crested a rise. The serpent's throat, the ravine twisted like a great snake through the plateau, its walls rising hundreds of feet on either side. At its narrowest point, the gap was barely wide enough for two camels to pass side by side. The Empire's armies could never breach it, she continued. 100 defenders could hold against thousands at this pass. Yet Akhet fell, Kedar observed. Zara's weathered face darkened. Treachery, not strength, brought Akhet to ruin. One of your father's advisors opened a hidden path to the Imperial forces. They descended into the ravine, the temperature dropping as sunlight struggled to reach the stone floor. Nira woke, her eyes widening at the towering walls surrounding them. Are there monsters here? She whispered. Only those made of memory, Kedar replied, surprised by the poetic turn of his own thoughts. They traveled for hours through the twisting passage. Occasionally, Kedar noticed ancient carvings on the stone walls, figures locked in battle, strange symbols and what appeared to be maps of the stars. The history of your people, Zara explained, seeing his interest. Written so that even if Akhet fell, its story would endure. As the sun reached its zenith, the ravine widened suddenly, opening into a vast circular valley. Kedar's breath caught in his throat. Before them stood the ruins of a once magnificent city. Sandstone buildings rose in concentric circles around a central plateau, where a massive temple still dominated the skyline, its 7 spires reaching toward the heavens. Though crumbling and half-buried by 40 years of desert winds, the grandeur of Akhet was unmistakable. Home, the word escaped Kedar's lips unbidden. Nura sat up straighter. It's beautiful. The nomads made camp at the city's edge, reluctant to venture too deeply among the ruins. Superstition kept them away from what they considered a place of ghosts, but Kedar felt drawn to the silent streets. With Nura's small hand in his, he walked past crumbling homes and shops, debris crunching beneath their feet. Occasionally he would stop, a fragment of memory tugging at the edges of his consciousness, a marketplace where he had once played, a fountain where women had gathered to share stories. Look, father. Nura pointed to a wall covered in faded paintings. Pictures. The mural depicted scenes of daily life in Akhet, merchants trading goods, children playing priests, conducting ceremonies beneath the 7 spires. And there, near the center, stood a proud warrior with a medallion identical to the one now hanging around Kedar's neck. Your grandfather, he told Nura, tracing the figure with trembling fingers. A man I can barely remember. They continued toward the central temple, climbing worn steps that had once been processed by thousands. At the temple entrance, Kedar hesitated. Something about the massive stone doors triggered a visceral response. A child's fear long buried. The Imperial soldiers came through here, he said slowly, memories seeping back like water through parched earth. I was hiding behind the altar. Nura squeezed his hand. We can go back. No. He straightened his shoulders. I need to remember. Inside, shafts of light penetrated the damaged roof, illuminating motes of dust in the cavernous space. Columns carved with intricate patterns supported what remained of the ceiling. At the far end stood a stone altar, behind which rose a massive statue of a woman with upraised arms. The Desert Mother, Kedar whispered, the name coming from some hidden recess of memory. Nura approached the altar, her small fingers tracing the ancient inscription. To Kedar's astonishment, she began to read aloud in the old tongue, words he could understand but not decipher himself. When darkness covers the land, look to the child of mixed blood. Elements shall obey, chains shall break, and the Desert Mother will walk again among her people. How can you read this? Kedar asked, amazed. Nura shrugged. The symbols speak to me, like the fire did. As she continued tracing the inscriptions, her finger caught on a small depression. There was a grinding of stone, and a section of the altar slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a small stone object, a key carved with symbols matching those on Kedar's medallion. I've seen this before, he said, lifting it carefully. The weight felt familiar in his palm. Memory flashed. A tall man pressing it into his small hand. Urgent whispers, the sounds of battle approaching. "Keep it safe, my son. When the time comes, it will unlock our people's greatest treasure." Nura leaned close. "What does it open?" "I don't know," Kedar admitted. "But I've carried it all these years without knowing." He reached beneath his tunic and pulled out a worn leather pouch, the one possession the slavers had not taken from him as a child. Inside was a small stone identical to the one from the altar. "I always thought it was just a lucky stone," he murmured. "I kept it hidden even from your mother." Zara's voice came from the temple entrance. "The twins of Akhet," she said, approaching slowly. "Legend says when reunited, they will reveal the path to the desert mother's heart." "More legends," Kedar sighed. "While real dangers approach, the vizier will not stop hunting us." "Legends and dangers are often the same thing," Zara replied cryptically. "The Empire fears these ruins for good reason. Your father died protecting the secrets of Akhet, secrets the vizier still seeks to possess." A nomad scout appeared at the doorway, breathless. Riders approaching from the north. They bear the black scorpion banner. Kedar's blood ran cold. The royal hunters. Zara's face paled. "Tariq." "Who is Tariq?" Nura asked, sensing the adult's fear. "The Empire's most feared tracker," Kedar explained, tucking both stone keys securely away. "A man who has never failed to catch his prey." "Then we should not be prey," Nura said simply. "You should teach me to fight, like you did." Kedar looked down at his daughter in surprise. In her eyes he saw not fear, but determination, the same expression he'd glimpsed in the mirror during rare moments of defiance throughout his years of servitude. "Yes," he agreed, taking her hand. "It's time you learned the ways of your people, both sides of your heritage." Tariq stood at the edge of the ravine, the wind ruffling his black cloak. Unlike the gaudy uniforms of imperial soldiers, his attire was practical, dark leather armor adorned only with the emblem of a black scorpion on his chest. A dozen elite hunters waited behind him, their faces impassive beneath desert wraps. "The tracks lead into the serpent's throat," his second-in-command reported. Tariq nodded, fingering the scorpion amulet at his throat. "They seek refuge in Akhet." Predictable, his voice was soft, almost gentle, a stark contrast to his reputation for ruthless efficiency. "The ruins are vast, Commander. Finding them will be difficult." "Finding them is inevitable," Tariq corrected. "The only variable is time." He turned to his men. "We camp here tonight. Enter the ravine at first light." Meanwhile, deep within the ruins, Kedar worked with Nura in a secluded courtyard. 3 days had passed since they'd spotted the hunters. The nomads had concealed their presence as best they could, but all knew it was merely delaying the inevitable. "Keep your arm up," Kedar instructed, guiding Nura through defensive movements with a wooden practice sword. "Your size is a disadvantage against larger opponents, but also an opportunity. You are a smaller target." Nura repeated the movement, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Like this? Better." Pride swelled in Kedar's chest. Despite her youth, Nura absorbed lessons with remarkable speed. Now again, as they trained, Kedar found himself remembering techniques he had no conscious recollection of learning. His body seemed to know the forms, the strategies, the flow of combat. Each day, more fragments of his former life surfaced, like shards of pottery slowly unearthed by desert winds. "Enough for today," he said finally, noting Nura's fatigue. "Let's practice something else." They sat cross-legged in the courtyard center. "Close your eyes," he instructed. "Feel the air around you, the heat of the stones, the coolness of the shadows." Nura obeyed, her breathing slowing to a measured rhythm. "Now reach for that place inside you that called to the fire." For several days they had worked on controlling her unusual gift. The results were inconsistent. Sometimes a nearby flame would flicker in response to her concentration. Other times nothing happened at all. "I can feel it," she whispered, "like a warm pool inside my chest." "Good. Now, very gently, try to touch the closest flame." A small cooking fire burned 20 paces away where the nomad women prepared the evening meal. As Noura concentrated, the flame suddenly leapt 3 feet into the air, then settled back. "I did it," she exclaimed, eyes flying open. "Careful," Kedar cautioned. "Control is more important than power." That night, as Noura slept in their shared tent, Kedar joined the nomad leaders around the central fire. Zara passed him a cup of bitter tea, her clouded eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "The hunter entered the ravine at dawn," the war chief reported. "They moved cautiously but with purpose. 2 days, perhaps 3, before they reached the city. We should leave," one of the younger warriors suggested. "The western path. There is no escape from Tariq," Zara interrupted. "Not in the open desert. The stories are clear." "What stories?" Kedar asked. The war chief's expression darkened. "They say he was a desert child, taken by the Empire as you were. But while you were made a gardener, he was shaped into a weapon. They say he can track a scorpion across stone, that he sleeps with his eyes open, that he has never failed to capture his prey." "All men fail eventually," Kedar said. "Perhaps," Zara agreed. "But are you willing to risk your daughter on that hope?" Later, unable to sleep, Kedar walked the silent streets of his ancestral home. The twin moons cast long shadows across ancient stones. He found himself drawn to the temple again, seeking something. Answers, purpose, memory. Inside, moonlight streamed through the damaged roof, bathing the altar in silver light. Kedar approached, running his hands over the inscriptions Noura had read so effortlessly. "I don't understand," he whispered to the empty hall. "Why us? Why now, after 40 years? A soft sound made him turn. Noura stood in the moonlight, her small figure silhouetted against the temple entrance. "I had a dream," she said, approaching, "about Mother." Kedar knelt to her level. "What did she say?" "She was standing right here by the altar. She said, 'Tell him to look beneath where the 7th spire casts its shadow at dawn.'" Noura frowned. "What does it mean?" Kedar looked up at the great statue of the Desert Mother, then to the damaged roof where the 7 spires were visible against the night sky. "I think," he said slowly, "it means your mother knew more about Akhet than she ever revealed to me." At dawn they stood in the temple courtyard, watching as the rising sun cast the shadow of the 7th spire across the flagstone. Kedar followed its path, counting steps, until he reached a large circular stone. "Here," he said, brushing away decades of accumulated dust. Beneath was an inscription, and a small indentation in the shape of his medallion. With trembling fingers, Kedar removed the bronze sun from around his neck and placed it in the depression. The stone groaned, then shifted, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Stay here," he told Noura. She shook her head firmly. Together, the stairs led to a small chamber lined with shelves of scrolls and ancient artifacts. At its center stood a pedestal bearing a single document, sealed with wax imprinted with the same sun symbol. Kedar broke the seal carefully. The parchment inside contained a detailed map of tunnels running beneath Akhet and beyond, secret passages that could take them far from the hunter's reach. "A way out," he breathed. Noura touched his arm, pointing to a small marking on the map, a birthmark identical to the one on her own shoulder blade. "Father, look." Beside the mark were words in the ancient script. "The royal blood still flows. The child shall reclaim what was taken." Royal blood. Kedar looked at his daughter in confusion. "Mother said her family once ruled all the desert lands," Noura said quietly. "Before the Empire came, the revelation struck Kedar like a physical blow. Samira had not merely been nobility, she had been descended from the very royal line the Empire had overthrown generations ago. And that meant Noura was not just a child of mixed blood. She was the heir to both Akhet and Zarahm, to the desert and the empire that had conquered it. The enormity of this truth and the danger it represented left Kedar monitory speechless. No wonder the vizier hunted them so relentlessly. Dawn broke as Kedar, Nura, and a small group of nomads slipped through the hidden passage beneath Akhet. The rest of the Barik tribe had departed along the western trail, a deliberate diversion to draw Tariq's attention. The tunnels have stood for centuries, Zara explained as they navigated the narrow passage. Built by the first kings of Akhet as an escape route should the city ever fall. The ancient corridor sloped gently downward, air growing cooler and damper with each step. Kedar carried a torch, its light revealing carvings along the walls, stories of a time before the empire, when desert tribes lived freely under their own rule. Your mother was Samira of House Jalani, Zara told Nura as they walked. Her bloodline traces to the last true queen of the United Desert Lands. The empire has spent generations hunting down every descendant of that line, yet she hid in plain sight. Kedar marveled. In the palace itself, the royal family of Zarahm took the Jalani children as hostages generations ago, raising them as nobles while exterminating any who remained free. They became palace ornaments, closely watched but valued for their ancient blood, useful tools for legitimizing imperial rule over the desert people. Nura listened intently. So mother was a prisoner too, like you. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Kedar agreed. After hours of walking, they heard the distant sound of rushing water. The tunnel opened into a vast underground cavern where a river cut through the stone, its black waters flowing swift and silent. The Veiled River, Zara said with reverence. It flows beneath the desert, unseen by imperial eyes. The traders who navigate it are the last free merchants in these lands. 3 small boats awaited them, their lanterns casting dancing reflections on the cavern walls. Dark-skinned men with intricate facial tattoos stood ready at the oars. Friends of the Barik, the war chief explained. They will take us beyond Tariq's reach. As they loaded their meager possessions onto the boats, Kedar noticed Nura studying the river men with fascination. Their marks tell their stories, he explained. Each line, each pattern represents a journey or an achievement. Will I have marks someday? She asked. You already carry the most important mark. He touched her shoulder gently, where the royal birthmark lay hidden beneath her clothes. One that connects you to both your heritages. The rivermen worked in near silence, communicating through subtle gestures as they guided the boats into the current. Kedar and Nura sat in the lead vessel, watching as the cavern walls slipped past. Occasionally the tunnel would open to reveal breathtaking underground chambers. Vast spaces where luminescent fungi painted the ceilings in ghostly blue light, or where crystal formations caught their lanterns and scattered the light like stars. I never knew such places existed, Kedar whispered, awed by the hidden world beneath the desert he thought he knew. The Empire sees only what can be conquered, Zara replied from the second boat. These realms remain free because they remain secret. As they journeyed, the head riverman, a weathered elder named Sekan, approached Kedar with surprising familiarity. I knew your father, he said without preamble, and I knew you as a boy. You once sat in my boat during the summer gathering of tribes. Another fragment of memory surfaced, the feeling of gentle rocking, hands trailing in cool water, laughter echoing off stone. I remember water, Kedar admitted, but little else. Memory or not, the son of Kedar is welcome among the river folk. Sekan's tattooed face creased in a smile. Though I admit, I never expected to see you with a child of the Jalani blood. Neither did I, Kedar said softly, watching as Nura dozed against a bundle of blankets. Such a child has not existed for generations. Desert and imperial blood united. There are those who have waited for such a one. The prophecy, Kedar sighed. Zara mentioned it. Not just a prophecy, Sekan corrected. A resistance. People from both worlds who work in shadow to undermine the Empire's grip. The revelations stirred something in Kedar, a purpose beyond mere survival. Where do we find these people? They will find you, Sekan replied cryptically. But first, we must reach the eastern shore, where the river meets the red cliffs. As night fell in the underground world, marked only by the rivermen's changing of lanterns from white to blue, Nura woke from her slumber. She sat beside Kedar at the boat's prow, watching the dark waters part before them. "Mother gave me something," she said suddenly, reaching beneath her tunic. "Before she sent me to find you, she said not to show anyone until we were safe." From around her neck, Nura removed a small silver locket. The intricate design matched the royal insignia they had seen in the hidden chamber beneath Akhet. With small fingers she worked a hidden catch. The locket sprang open, revealing not a portrait but a tightly folded piece of parchment. Carefully, Kedar unfolded it. Inside was a detailed map, different from the tunnel map they had found in Akhet. This one showed a route through the red cliffs to a location marked with a single word: sanctuary. She knew, Kedar whispered. All those years in the palace gardens she was planning this. Planning what? Nura asked. Before he could answer, a shout came from the rear boat. Their lanterns were immediately doused, plunging them into complete darkness. "What is it?" Kedar hissed. "Imperial scouts," came the hushed reply. "They've found the river passage." In the perfect blackness of the underground river, Kedar clutched Nura close, feeling the gentle sway as the rivermen guided their vessels into a side channel. How could they have found this place? Zara whispered from nearby. "Tariq," Kedar replied grimly. "They say he can track a scorpion across stone." As if summoned by his name, a torch flared to life in the main tunnel behind them, illuminating the sleek black boats of Imperial scouts. And there, standing in the lead vessel, was a figure in dark leather armor, the silver scorpion on his chest, catching the torchlight. "The hunter," Nura breathed. "Extinguish all lights," Sekan ordered in a harsh whisper. "Follow the sound of my voice and the current." In total darkness, their boats slipped silently into a narrow side channel. Kedar held Nura close, feeling her small heart racing against his chest. The sound of Imperial scouts echoed through the cavern, their voices carrying over water. "They're too many," the war chief whispered from nearby. "At least 3 boats. They won't venture far without light," Sekan responded. "The river has claimed many who disrespected her depths." For what seemed like hours, they drifted in darkness, guided only by the rivermen's intimate knowledge of the underwater labyrinth. Finally, Sekan allowed a single hooded lantern to be lit, revealing a small dock carved from the living rock. "We must abandon the river," he explained, as they disembarked. "There's another way to the red cliffs." The group followed a narrow path ascending through the stone. Footholds and handholds had been carved centuries ago, worn smooth by countless hands. Nara climbed with surprising agility, her small size an advantage in the confined space. As they emerged from the passageway, Kedar froze. Before them stretched an enormous chasm, a great crack in the earth at least 200 paces across, and so deep the bottom was lost in shadow. A single rope bridge, ancient and weathered, provided the only crossing. "The Guardian's Cut," Zara explained. "The last defense of the Eastern Territories. Once across, we'll be beyond Zaraham's traditional hunting grounds." One of the river guides, a younger man with fewer tattoos than his companions, stepped forward. "I'll secure the far side," he volunteered as he tested the bridge's nearest ropes. Another riverman caught Kedar's arm. "Hamad is eager to please," he murmured, "but he joined our guild only last season. His father serves the Imperial Customs Office in Zaraham's eastern port." Before Kedar could process this warning, Hamad had already crossed half the bridge, moving with confident steps despite the swaying beneath him. "Something's wrong," Nura whispered, her eyes fixed on the young riverman. "He's not afraid enough." The moment Hamad reached the far side, he pulled something from his tunic, a small mirror that caught the sunlight, flashing 3 distinct times toward the distant cliffs. "Betrayal," the war chief snarled, unsheathing his blade. "Cut the bridge," Kedar ordered, drawing his own sword. 2 nomads rushed forward, but before they could reach the anchor ropes, Hamad had drawn a bow. His first arrow took one nomad in the chest. His second missed the war chief by inches. Kedar pushed Nura behind him. "Stay with Zara," he commanded, then charged toward the bridge. The ropes swayed violently as he advanced. Hamad knocked another arrow, aiming carefully. Kedar dropped flat as the missile whistled overhead. Rolling to his feet, he continued his charge across the unstable span. Behind him, shouts erupted. From a concealed path on their side of the chasm, Imperial soldiers appeared, at least a dozen, led by a familiar figure in black leather. "Tariq," Zara gasped. Halfway across the bridge, Kedar was committed. He couldn't turn back without being caught in the open. Ahead, Hamad drew a wicked, curved dagger. "The vizier rewards those who serve," the young riverman called. "He'll make me a lord for delivering the child." "He'll make you a corpse," Kedar replied, advancing steadily despite the swaying bridge. Hamad lunged, his blade glinting in the sunlight. Kedar parried, the impact sending dangerous vibrations through the ancient structure. They exchanged blows, their movements limited by the narrow, unsteady surface. Back at the near side, chaos erupted. The nomads and rivermen formed a defensive line as Tariq's soldiers attacked. Kedar caught glimpses of the battle as he fought, Nura being pulled back by Zara, the war chief engaging Tariq himself. Hamid was younger, faster, but Kedar fought with the desperation of a father protecting his child. When the riverman overextended, Kedar struck. His blade found its mark, and Hamid stumbled backward, clutching his side. "You're already dead," the young man gasped, blood seeping between his fingers. "We all are." From his tunic, he withdrew a small vial. Before Kedar could react, Hamid had uncorked it and flung the contents at him, a dark, oily substance that splashed across Kedar's chest and arm. Burning pain erupted wherever the liquid touched. Through watering eyes, Kedar Hamid smiled cruelly, then deliberately cut one of the main support ropes. The bridge lurched violently. As Hamid fell into the abyss, Kedar lunged for the far side. His fingers found purchase on the edge of the cliff, but the poison was already working through his system. Numbness spread from his arm, weakening his grip. Below, the severed bridge collapsed into the chasm. On the opposite side, he saw Tariq personally engage the war chief, their blades moving in lethal arcs. The nomad fighters were falling one by one. "Father!" Nura's desperate cry carried across the void. With failing strength, Kedar pulled himself onto the ledge. The poison burned through his veins like fire. He tried to stand but fell to his knees, the world spinning around him. Across the chasm, a terrible scene unfolded. Tariq had disarmed the war chief and now held him at sword point. The remaining nomads were surrounded, and there was Nura, Zara's protective arm around her shoulders, nowhere to flee. "Surrender the child," Tariq's calm voice carried across the void, "and these people may live." Even through his pain, Kedar could see the lie in this promise. Once Nura was taken, no witnesses would be left alive. Fever gripped him as the poison worked deeper. Visions swam before his eyes, Samira's face, the gardens of Zarahm, his father's medallion. As consciousness began to slip away, he saw Nura break free from Zara's grasp. The child stood at the edge of the chasm, her small face set in determination. She raised her hands, and to Kedar's astonishment, flames appeared, not from any torch or fire pit, but from the air itself. The fire grew, swirling around her like a protective cloak. Even Tariq stepped back, momentary uncertainty crossing his impassive features. "Leave them alone," Nura's voice seemed to echo with power beyond her years. The flames shot forward, forming a wall between the Imperial soldiers and the nomads. In the confusion, Zara pulled Nura back from the edge, gesturing frantically toward a narrow path that descended into the chasm. The last thing Kedar saw before darkness claimed him was his daughter's small form disappearing down that path, the old woman guiding her toward the depths of the Guardian's cut, toward him. Then blackness swallowed everything. Fever dreams haunted Kedar's unconscious mind. He was a boy again, running through Aket's streets as imperial soldiers poured through the gates. He was a young man bent over palace gardens, stealing glance at a noble woman reading beneath a flowering tree. He was a father, watching his daughter command fire with small, outstretched hands. "He stirs," a woman's voice, unfamiliar and accented, pierced the veil of delirium. "Father?" Nira's anxious face swam into focus, her small hand cool against his burning forehead. "The poison nearly claimed him," the strange woman continued. "3 days we've drawn it from his blood. The fourth is always decisive." Kedar tried to speak, but his throat produced only a dry rasp. A wooden cup appeared at his lips, held by weathered hands. The liquid tasted of bitter herbs and something metallic, blood perhaps. "Drink," the woman commanded. "All of it." He obeyed, each swallow sending tendrils of coolness through his burning veins. As the cup emptied, clarity gradually returned. He was lying on a pallet in a small stone chamber. Sunlight filtered through a narrow window, illuminating particles of dust dancing in the air. "Where?" he managed to whisper. "The Red Cliffs," Nira answered, her face brightening at his recognition. "The mountain people found us in the canyon and brought us to their village." Memory returned in fragments. The chasm, the betrayal, Tariq's forces. "The nomads?" he asked. Nira's expression fell. "Only Zara escaped with us. The others," she trailed off, unable to continue. "They fought bravely," the strange woman said. She was elderly, with intricate tattoos covering her face and hands, different from the river people's marks. "The hunter's reputation remains intact. He does not leave witnesses. Yet you saved us," Kedar observed, struggling to sit up. "The sight led me to the bottom of the Guardian's Cut 3 days past. I am Thema, healer of the Ket tribe." She gestured to a gnarled wooden staff, leaning against the wall. "The old ways still live in these mountains." Over the next days, as strength gradually returned to Kedar's limbs, he learned how narrowly they had escaped. Zara and Nira had descended a hidden path into the chasm, finding him unconscious on the ledge. Unable to carry him, they had hidden as Tariq's men searched the far rim. "It was the child who saved you," Thema told him, when they were alone. "She placed her hands upon your chest where the poison had entered, and fire appeared, not burning fire, but healing fire. I have seen such gifts only in ancient scrolls." "She grows stronger," Kedar mused, watching through the window as Nira played with mountain children in the village square. "Yet she's still just a child. A child with the blood of 2 ancient lines," Thema reminded him. "The convergence of river and flame." The mountain village was built into the red stone itself, dwellings and storerooms carved from the living rock, connected by winding stairs and narrow bridges. The Ket people had maintained their independence by remaining hidden, their existence a mere rumor in imperial records. When Kedar could walk again, Zara joined him on a small terrace overlooking the vast canyon below. The old nomad woman had aged visibly since their ordeal, grief etching deeper lines around her eyes. "My people died protecting your daughter," she said without preamble. "They believed in the prophecy. They believed she could end generations of imperial tyranny. She's just a girl," Kedar protested. 8 years old and already hunted like an animal. Age matters little. The signs are clear." Zara withdrew a folded parchment from her robes, the map from Samira's locket. "Your path leads beyond these mountains to the resistance stronghold. More fighting, more death." Kedar sighed, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. "What alternative remains? Return to Zarahm and bow before the vizier. Hide in these mountains until Tariq inevitably finds you." Zara's voice hardened. "The time for gardening is past, son of Kedar. Your father's blood calls you to leadership." That evening, the elders of the Ket tribe gathered in their central hall, a vast chamber whose domed ceiling was painted with constellations. Kedar was given the place of honor beside Thema, with Nira at his side. "For generations we have kept the old ways," the chief elder announced, his voice echoing off stone walls. We have watched the Empire's shadow spread across the desert lands. We have waited for the one who would unite the scattered tribes. His aged eyes fixed on Kedar. The son of Kedar returns, bearing the child of prophecy. Whispers spread through the assembly. Kedar felt dozens of eyes upon him, expectant, hopeful. The burden of their expectations pressed on him like a physical weight. "I am no leader," he said, rising to address them. "For 40 years I tended gardens, not armies. Yet you fought like a warrior born when danger threatened your child," Thema observed. "The blood remembers what the mind forgets." The chief elder approached, bearing Thema's staff. To Kedar's surprise, he knelt, offering the gnarled wood. "This has passed from healer to healer since the days before the Empire. Now it must serve a different purpose." "I don't understand," Kedar said, reluctant to accept. "It is no longer enough to heal the wounded," Thema explained. "Now we must prevent the wounded. The tribes must unite against Zarahm, and they will only follow the son of their last great leader." Nura's small hand slipped into his. "Mother said you would lead them someday." She saw it in her dreams. Looking into his daughter's trusting eyes, Kedar felt something shift within him, like a door long closed, finally swinging open. With steady hands, he accepted the staff. "Not for power," he said quietly. "For her future. For all our children." As his fingers closed around the ancient wood, a cheer rose from the gathered tribe. In that moment, the gardener receded, and the son of Kedar, the leader he was born to be, began to emerge from 40 years of enforced slumber. Dawn painted the red cliffs in hues of flame as Kedar studied the battle map spread before him. 4 weeks had transformed the reluctant gardener into something his younger self would not recognize, a leader of the growing resistance against Zaram's empire. "The Tajer merchants have confirmed their support," reported Darius, a former imperial soldier who had deserted after witnessing the massacre of a desert village. "They'll divert supply caravans to our cause." Kedar nodded, placing a carved stone marker on the trade routes east of Zarahm. "And the Barik survivors?" "Regrouping in the southern oases," Zara replied. Her health had improved in recent weeks, though grief for her lost tribespeople still shadowed her eyes. 30 warriors remain, all sworn to your banner. The map had grown more detailed with each passing day. Strategic locations, potential allies, imperial outposts. Intelligence flowed in from unexpected sources. Desert nomads, disaffected imperial subjects, even palace servants who risked execution to smuggle information. "We need more than scattered guerrilla forces," Kedar mused. "To challenge Zarahm directly would require an army. Armies grow from seeds," Thema observed from her seat by the window. "And you have planted many." Beyond the council chamber, the mountain village had transformed into a military encampment. Refugees from imperial oppression arrived daily, some to join the fight, others seeking only sanctuary. What had begun as a desperate flight had evolved into a movement that threatened the Empire's iron grip on the desert lands. Later that morning, Kedar found Nura in the village central courtyard, seated cross-legged before a small fire pit. Under Thema's guidance, she had begun formal training in the desert magic that flowed through her blood. "Watch," she said excitedly as he approached. With a look of intense concentration, she extended her small hands toward the flames. The fire twisted upward, forming the shape of a bird that fluttered briefly before dissolving into embers. "Impressive," Kedar acknowledged, pride warming his chest. "Your control improves daily. Thema says I have the strongest gift she's seen in generations." Nura's expression turned serious. "She says it's because of my mixed blood, desert magic, and imperial lineage combined." Kedar sat beside her on the stone bench. "Does that frighten you?" She considered the question with a maturity that sometimes startled him. "Not the power," she finally answered, "but what people expect me to do with it." The weight of prophecy and expectation. Kedar understood this burden all too well. "You are more than your bloodlines or your gifts," he assured her. "Never forget that." Their moment of peace was interrupted by the arrival of a dust-covered messenger. Riders approaching from the eastern pass, the young scout reported breathlessly. At least 20 former slaves by their appearance. At the village's defensive wall, Kedar watched through a spyglass as the column approached. The riders bore no imperial insignia, their clothing a hodgepodge of styles, suggesting lives lived in the Empire's shadows. Escaped slaves, Darius confirmed. I recognize the leader, Tabor. He organized a revolt in the eastern mining district last season. When the newcomers were admitted to the village, their leader, a massive man with ritual scars covering his shaved head, knelt before Kedar. Son of Kedar, Tabor rumbled, word of your return has reached even the slave quarters of Zarahm. We come to offer our swords. That night, around communal fires, the escaped slaves shared stories that hardened Kedar's resolve. Tales of brutality, of children torn from parents, of entire communities worked to death in the Empire's mines and quarries. The vizier grows more ruthless. Tabor explained as they shared a simple meal. After your escape with the royal child, he purged the palace staff. Anyone suspected of sympathy to your cause was executed. Royal child, Kedar questioned. The people whisper that your daughter carries the blood of the ancient queens, that she is the fulfillment of the prophecy. Tabor's eyes shone with fervent belief. Some say she commands the elements themselves. The rumors had spread faster than Kedar had anticipated. He caught Zara's concerned glance across the fire. And the imperial forces, he asked, steering the conversation toward practical matters. What of their movements? The vizier has recalled troops from the western provinces, Tabor reported. The capital's defenses have doubled, but there's more. The emperor has not been seen in public for 3 full moons. Some whisper he has fallen ill. This news stirred murmurs among the gathered resistance leaders. The emperor, while hardly benevolent, had occasionally tempered the vizier's more extreme policies. His absence would give Maktar free rein. If the emperor is incapacitated, Darius noted, the empire is vulnerable. Their chain of command relies on his authority, or it presents an opportunity for the vizier to seize absolute power. Kedar countered. Either way, we must accelerate our plans. Later, studying the battle map alone, Kedar traced the route to Zarahm. The city where he had spent 40 years in servitude now seemed both familiar and foreign. No longer his prison, but his objective. A soft sound drew his attention. Nira stood in the doorway, her sleeping robe wrapped tightly around her small frame. Another nightmare?" he asked gently. She nodded, crossing to stand beside him. "I saw Tariq again. He was following a trail of fire." "My fire." Kedar put a protective arm around her shoulders. "He can't reach you here." "It's not me I'm worried about," she said, surprising him with her insight. "He'll hurt anyone who helps us. I saw him in the desert, hunting our messengers." A chill ran through Kedar. Nira's dreams had proven unnervingly prophetic in recent weeks. "Then we'll warn them," he assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "We'll find a safer way to communicate." As he guided her back to bed, a scout burst into the chamber, face pale with urgency. "Signal fires from the western watchtower," the young woman reported. "A large force approaches through Scorpion Pass." "Imperial troops?" Kedar asked, already reaching for his sword. "No, my lord. The watchman reports tribal standards, at least 5 different clans. Desert tribes. Here." Zara appeared in the doorway, her aged face alight with hope. "Which clans?" "Barik, Tajir, Ket, Suvan, and Marid," the scout recited. "Their chieftains ride at the head of the column." Kedar and Zara exchanged stunned glances. The 5 greatest desert tribes had not united since the fall of Akhet generations ago. "They've come," Zara whispered. "Just as the prophecy foretold, the desert rises for the child of 2 worlds." The 5 tribal chieftains knelt before Kedar in the great hall of the mountain sanctuary, their ceremonial robes a riot of color against the austere stone walls. Each placed their weapon at his feet, an ancient gesture of allegiance not seen in the desert lands for generations. "The son of Kedar returns," intoned the eldest, a weathered man with gold rings woven into his grey beard. "As it was foretold, I am honored by your trust," Kedar responded, discomfort with such formality still evident in his stance. "But I have been absent from our ways for 40 years. There are others more deserving of leadership." "Blood speaks," the married chieftain said simply, "and yours calls to all desert people." That night, a council of war convened. The combined tribal forces numbered nearly 1,000 warriors, impressive, yet still vastly outnumbered by imperial troops. "We cannot match them in open battle," Darius cautioned, his experience as a former imperial officer lending weight to his word. "Their discipline and equipment are superior. Yet we have advantages they lack." Kedar countered, studying the map. Knowledge of the terrain, the support of local populations, and he hesitated, aware of the weight his next words carried. "We have the child of prophecy." All eyes turned to Nura, who sat quietly beside Thyma. The tribal leaders had reacted with awe upon meeting her, many prostrating themselves before the wide-eyed girl despite Kedar's protests. "The child should remain hidden," Zara advised. "Her safety is paramount." Before further discussion could unfold, alarm horns echoed through the mountain passages. A scout burst into the chamber, his expression grim. "Imperial forces approaching from the south," he reported breathlessly. "At least 300. They bear the Black Scorpion banner." Tariq, Kedar, breathed. The name alone sent a ripple of tension through the gathering. "How?" demanded the Barik chieftain. "This sanctuary has remained secret for generations. The hunter finds all prey eventually," Darius said grimly. "We must evacuate immediately." Kedar stood silent, weighing their options. The mountain paths offered escape routes, but fleeing would mean abandoning the refugees who had sought protection within these walls. Families, children, the elderly. "No," he decided. "We make our stand here." Dawn revealed the full extent of their predicament. Imperial forces had established positions, blocking all major paths from the mountain sanctuary. Their disciplined formations and siege equipment spoke of careful planning. Kedar observed them from the village's highest point, Tabor and Darius at his side. "They've brought ram catapults," Darius noted grimly. "They'll breach the outer defenses by midday." "Unless we give them something unexpected," Kedar replied, an idea forming as he watched Imperial archers preparing fire arrows. Throughout the morning he directed a flurry of preparations. Women and children were moved to the deepest chambers within the mountain. Warriors were positioned at strategic choke points, and most crucially, Kedar personally oversaw the creation of a weapon the desert tribes had never before employed. "Pottery jars filled with lamp oil," he explained to the skeptical chieftains. "When their arrows come, we'll have a surprise waiting." By midday, as Darius had predicted, the first assault began. Imperial troops advanced behind massive shields, while archers launched flaming projectiles over the village walls. But rather than ducking for cover, defenders rushed to position Kedar's clay vessels in the arrow's path. "Now," he commanded, when enough had accumulated. Archers on the defensive wall fired at the oil-soaked Imperial arrows, igniting them where they had landed among the Imperial ranks. The resulting explosions sent panic through the attacking forces, their neat formations dissolving into chaos. Again, Kedar ordered, directing the placement of more oil jars. The Imperial commander, recognizing the threat, adjusted tactics. The ram catapults were brought forward, launching massive stones that shattered against the village outer walls. Each impact sent tremors through the mountain stone. As the sun began its westward descent, a breach appeared in the southern wall. Imperial troops poured through like a river of gleaming metal, their disciplined advance resuming once inside the outer defenses. The battle devolved into desperate close combat through the narrow streets and staircases of the mountain village. Desert warriors, though outnumbered, fought with the advantage of familiar terrain. Kedar moved through the chaos, directing defenders to critical positions, his gardener's staff now replaced by a commander's sword. Decades of buried heritage had resurfaced completely in his stance, his tactical instincts, his natural authority. They're pressing toward the central plaza. Tabor reported, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, searching for something, or someone. Kedar realized with sudden clarity. Where is Nura? With Thema in the healing chambers, Zara assured him. 3 levels below ground. A thunderous explosion rocked the entire mountainside. Stones cracked and fell as defenders and attackers alike stumbled for balance. Black powder, Darius gasped in horror. They've brought Imperial fire. The forbidden weapon, jealously guarded by Zaraham's military, had never before been deployed against desert tribes. Its use now signaled the vizier's desperation to capture Nura, regardless of collateral damage. Another explosion followed, closer to the village center. Imperial troops were using the devastation to push deeper into the sanctuary. Kedar fought his way toward the healing chambers, desperate to reach his daughter before Tariq's forces. As he descended the inner stairways, a familiar figure blocked his path. A man in dark leather armor, a silver scorpion gleaming on his chest. The gardener, Tariq's voice was calm, almost conversational, despite the chaos around them. Or should I say, the son of Kedar? Step aside, Kedar commanded, raising his blade. The vizier doesn't want you dead, Tariq replied, drawing his own weapon, a slender sword of unusual black metal. Only the child, surrender her, and you may yet live to see another garden. She is my daughter. She is a weapon, Tariq countered, one the Empire cannot allow to fall into rebel hands. Their blades met with a sound like distant thunder. Tariq fought with clinical precision, each movement economical and lethal. Kedar matched him with the instinctive skill of his bloodline, awakened fully in this moment of greatest need. Above them, the battle raged for the fate of the mountain sanctuary, and perhaps for the future of the desert lands themselves. Steel rang against steel as Kedar and Tariq fought through the mountain sanctuary's winding passages. Each man recognized in the other a formidable opponent, Tariq with his cold precision, Kedar with his awakened warrior's instinct. You fight well for a gardener, Tariq acknowledged, parrying a thrust that would have pierced his throat, and you show restraint for the vizier's hound, Kedar countered, noting how the hunter avoided lethal strikes. Their deadly dance continued down stone stairs and through narrow corridors. Behind them, the sounds of battle grew more monotone, the clash of armies giving way to isolated skirmishes as the Imperial forces pushed deeper into the sanctuary. The vizier studies the old prophecies, Tariq said, conversationally, as though they were not trying to kill each other. He believes your daughter is the culmination of a bloodline project generations in the making. Kedar faltered momentarily. What do you mean? Tariq seized the opening, his black blade slicing across Kedar's arm. The Jalani bloodline was preserved for a purpose. Your coupling with Lady Samira was no accident. Lies, Kedar growled, recovering his stance. Yet doubt crept into his mind. Had he truly been placed in the palace gardens by chance? Had Samira sought him out knowing who he truly was? Their fight spilled into the healing chambers, a vast cavern where the wounded from both sides lay on pallets, attended by Thama's apprentices. The combatants circled each other, mindful of the vulnerable around them. Where is she? Tariq demanded, eyes scanning the chamber. Beyond your reach, Kedar replied, though his own heart raced with concern. Nura was not among those present. A tremendous explosion shook the entire mountain, more powerful than those before. Dust and stone fragments rained from the ceiling. In the moment of distraction, Tariq lunged, not at Kedar, but past him, toward a hidden doorway partially concealed by hanging herbs. Kedar intercepted, their bodies colliding with bone-jarring force. Both men crashed through the doorway into a small antechamber, where Zara stood protectively before Nura. Run, Kedar shouted as he grappled with Tariq on the ground. The hunter was stronger, but Kedar fought with the desperation of a father. They rolled across the stone floor, each seeking advantage. Tariq's hands found Kedar's throat, squeezing with merciless strength. As darkness crept into the edges of Kedar's vision, a child's scream pierced the air, not in fear, but in rage. Suddenly, the pressure on his throat vanished as Tariq was thrown backward by an invisible force. Noura stood with arms outstretched, her small face contorted in concentration. Between her hands danced a ball of flame that illuminated the chamber with unnatural light. "Leave my father alone," she commanded, her voice eerily adult. Tariq rose slowly, eyeing the child with newfound respect. "So the stories are true. Go," Kedar rasped, struggling to his feet. "Zara, take her through the escape tunnels." "Too late," Tariq said softly. "The vizier has deployed his full arsenal. This mountain will be your tomb." As if summoned by his words, another massive explosion shook the sanctuary. This one was followed by the terrible sound of stone giving way, entire sections of the mountain collapsing. "Black powder charges in the lower caverns," Tariq explained. "Your sanctuary dies today, along with your rebellion." With unexpected swiftness, he drew a small crossbow from beneath his cloak. Before anyone could react, he fired, not at Kedar or Noura, but at the ceiling above them. The bolt detonated on impact, bringing down a cascade of rock that separated Tariq from the others. "Until we meet again," the hunter called through the settling dust. "The vizier will be disappointed, but the game continues." His footsteps receded as Kedar frantically searched for a way through the blockage. There was none. "We must use the western tunnels," Zara urged, pulling at his arm. "If the lower caverns are breached, we have minutes at most." Their escape was a nightmare of collapsing passages and choking dust. Kedar carried Noura when her strength failed, the child exhausted from her display of power. They emerged finally onto a narrow ledge, high on the mountain's western face, joined by a ragged stream of survivors fleeing through various exits. From this vantage, the full devastation was apparent. Great fissures had opened in the mountainside. Entire sections of the sanctuary had collapsed inward, sending plumes of dust skyward. The Imperial forces were already withdrawing, their mission of destruction complete. "How many escaped?" Kedar asked Darius, who limped toward them with a blood-soaked bandage around his thigh. "Perhaps half our fighting force. Most of the civilians made it to the lower escape routes before the main collapse." The former Imperial officer's face was grim. "But we've lost our stronghold, our supplies, many of our weapons." The tribal chieftains gathered on the mountainside as night fell, their diminished forces huddled around meager fires. The defeat hung heavy in the air, not just the loss of their sanctuary, but the demonstration of Imperial power that had destroyed it. "We cannot match their weapons," the married chieftain declared, voicing what many thought. "Perhaps it is better to return to our traditional lands, to fight smaller battles we can win." Murmurs of agreement spread through the gathering. The unity of the 5 tribes, so recently achieved, threatened to dissolve in the face of catastrophic defeat. Kedar stood silent, watching the faces around him. These proud people had risked everything to follow the son of Kedar, to protect the child of prophecy. Now their faith wavered, their resolve tested by Imperial might. "We lost a mountain," he said finally, his voice carrying across the hushed assembly. "They lost over half their forces." Surprise rippled through the gathering. "Count their dead," Kedar continued. "Count their wounded." The hunter departed with barely a third of the soldiers he arrived with. "What does it matter?" asked the Suvan chieftain bitterly. "They have thousands more." In answer, Kedar pulled from his tunic a small cylindrical object, sealed with the Imperial crest, a message container taken from a dead courier during their escape. "This was meant for Zarahm," he explained, breaking the seal. Inside was a tightly rolled parchment, marked with the vizier's personal symbol. As Kedar read its contents, his expression shifted from concentration to grim satisfaction. "The Emperor is dying," he announced, "poisoned slowly over months. though the message doesn't say by whom. The vizier has declared a ceremonial week of prayer for his recovery, during which he will assume temporary authority. The implications were immediately clear to all present. Maktur makes his move for the throne, Darius, and recalls his most loyal forces to the capital, Kedar added, scanning further, including those that survived today's battle. A new energy stirred among the tribal leaders. The Tajir chieftain leaned forward. If the capital's defenses are weakened, and if internal power struggles consume their leadership, added another. Kedar held up the royal seal affixed to the document, a small golden disc that authenticated imperial orders. This gives us something more valuable than a mountain fortress. It gives us opportunity. That night, as plans were laid for a bold new strategy, Kedar found Nura sitting alone at the edge of the encampment, staring at the distant glow of imperial campfires as they withdrew from the ruined sanctuary. "You saved my life today," he said, sitting beside her. "I wasn't strong enough to save everyone," she replied, her voice small with guilt. "No one is." He placed an arm around her thin shoulders. "But today you discovered your strength. Tomorrow we'll learn to direct it." She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his presence. "Where do we go now?" Kedar looked east, toward the distant imperial capital that had been his prison for 40 years. "To Zarahm," he said quietly. "To end this." The eastern desert stretched before them, a vast sea of sand and stone that separated the mountain ranges from imperial territory. What remained of their forces moved under cover of darkness, avoiding main roads and known imperial outposts. 2 weeks of hard travel had taken its toll. Water ran low, supplies dwindled, and the unity of the tribal coalition showed signs of strain. Twice they encountered imperial patrols, resulting in brief, violent skirmishes that left both sides with casualties they could ill afford. "We cannot continue like this," Darius cautioned during their nightly council. "Another week of open travel and we'll be too weak to pose any threat to Zarahm." Kedar nodded grimly. The desert sun had darkened his already weathered features, making him look more like the tribal warlord he was becoming than the palace gardener he had been. "There is another way," he said, unfolding Samira's map with its markings of underground passages. "A route my wife discovered, one the Empire knows nothing about." The entrance lay in an unremarkable ravine, a narrow crack in the stone barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Inside, ancient steps descended into darkness, their edges worn smooth by centuries of secret passage. "The servants' road," Zara explained as they made their way downward by torchlight. From the days when desert peoples traveled freely between settlements before the Empire sealed the borders, the tunnel widened as they descended, eventually opening into a vast underground network, a hidden world of passages, chambers, and unexpected wonders. In some places they walked through natural caverns whose ceilings glittered with luminescent crystals. In others they passed the remnants of ancient settlements, homes and markets carved directly into the living rock. "Our ancestors lived here during the Great Drought," Thema told Nura as they passed through a chamber adorned with faded murals. "When the sun scorched the surface lands, they found refuge in the embrace of stone. For 3 days they traveled through this subterranean realm, emerging occasionally through hidden exits to verify their position relative to the surface. Each time the looming walls of Zarahm grew closer. On the 4th floor they reached a natural amphitheater deep beneath the desert floor. Here, underground springs formed a small lake of crystal-clear water, surrounded by stone dwellings still in active use. "The last free settlement," Zara explained with evident pride, "neither conquered nor claimed on an imperial map. The inhabitants, a mixed community of escaped slaves, desert tribes, and others seeking refuge from imperial rule, greeted them with cautious hospitality. Their leader, an elderly woman named Jasira, embraced Zara like a long-lost sister. The resistance has waited generations for this moment," Jasira said, studying Kedar and Nura with knowing eyes. "The son of Kedar returns, bearing the child of 2 worlds, Word of their arrival spread quickly through the underground community. By nightfall, the amphitheater filled with people eager to glimpse the legendary figures from prophecy. "They expect miracles," Kedar murmured to Darius as they observed the gathering from a stone balcony. "Then give them hope instead," the former imperial officer replied. "Sometimes that's miracle enough." Kedar addressed the assembly, his voice echoing off ancient stone. He spoke not of prophecy or destiny, but of freedom, the simple right to live without imperial chains. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Volunteers came forward by the dozen, offering not just fighting strength, but critical intelligence about Zaraham's defenses. "The ceremonial week begins in 3 days," reported a former palace servant. "The vizier has ordered public prayers for the emperor's recovery, while privately preparing for succession. The garrison has been halved," added another, who worked the city markets. "Most elite troops were sent to crush the mountain rebellion and haven't yet returned." Most valuable of all was a palace guard who had deserted after witnessing Samira's execution. "I can get you inside," he promised. "There are passages known only to the servants, ways to move unseen even in the heart of imperial power." That night, Kedar pored over detailed maps of the capital, marking entry points and potential allies. A lifetime spent tending the palace gardens had given him intimate knowledge of its layout, knowledge that now served a very different purpose. "I should go with you," Nura insisted, watching her father's preparations. "Absolutely not," Kedar replied without looking up. "You'll remain here with Thema and Zara." "But the prophecy is just words," he interrupted, his tone gentler as he met her gaze. "You're my daughter, before you're anyone's prophesied savior." She stubbornly held his gaze. "Mother believed in the prophecy. She said my place would be in Zarahm when the time came." "Your mother also believed you would be safe," Kedar countered. "The palace is the most dangerous place in the empire for you." Their standoff was interrupted by Jale, who brought a simple clay cup of steaming liquid. "Desert mint," she explained, offering it to Nura. "It calms the mind before difficult discussion." As the child sipped the bitter tea, the old woman turned to Kedar. "The prophecy speaks of the child's presence when the empire falls, not of her fighting in battle. There are many ways to be present. What do you suggest?" Kedar asked, recognizing the wisdom in her measured tone. In answer, Jale Shura opened a weathered cabinet and withdrew a bundle of simple cloth, a servant's cloak of plain brown fabric, sized for a child. "In plain sight," she said, letting the garment unfold, "as so many of us have survived." The infiltration plan took shape over the following days. A small team would enter the city through the underground passages. Kedar, Darius, Tabor, and a handful of others with specific knowledge of the palace. Meanwhile, the tribal forces would position themselves outside the walls, ready to exploit any weakness from within. Nura, despite Kedar's continued objections, would accompany them in disguise, a decision supported by both Zara and Thema. "Her abilities may prove crucial," the old healer argued, "and she has demonstrated wisdom beyond her years." The night before their departure, Kedar found his daughter sitting beside the underground lake, trailing her fingers through the crystal waters. "Are you afraid?" he asked, settling beside her on the smooth stone. "Yes," she admitted, "but Mother always said that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right, despite the fear." Kedar smiled sadly. "She was wise, your mother. Do you think she knew what would happen to all of us?" He considered the question carefully. "I think she saw possibilities, paths that might unfold if certain choices were made. She gave us the map, the locket, the knowledge we would need. The rest was up to us." Nura leaned against him, suddenly seeming very small and young, despite the great destiny others had placed upon her shoulders. "I just want us to be free," she whispered. "All of us." Kedar put his arm around her, watching the ripples spread across the underground lake from where her fingers had touched its surface. "Then that's what we'll fight for," he promised. "Not prophecies or thrones, but freedom." Zarahm rose before them like a mirage, its white walls gleaming in the morning sun. From their vantage point in the abandoned quarries east of the city, Kedar studied the place that had been his prison for 40 years. The massive gates stood open for the ceremonial week, allowing pilgrims from outlying provinces to enter for prayers at the imperial temples. "The city mourns," observed their guide, a former palace guard named Merrin. "Though few believe the emperor will recover, they mourn the stability he represented," Darius added. "Many fear what comes next." Disguised as humble pilgrims, their small group approached the eastern gate. Kedar kept his head bowed, the hood of his robe concealing his face. Beside him walked Anura, similarly disguised, her small hand tucked securely in his. The guards performed only cursory inspections, more concerned with weapons than identities. One soldier briefly studied Kedar's weathered face, but showed no recognition. 40 years of servitude had rendered him invisible to such men. Inside the walls, Zarahm pulsed with nervous energy. Imperial banners hung at half-mast from every tower. Street preachers called for prayers to speed the emperor's recovery. Yet beneath the public displays of concern, Kedar sensed anticipation, the city collectively holding its breath, waiting for change. "This way," Merrin directed, leading them through crowded market streets toward the artisans' quarter. "We'll enter the palace through the clay tunnels." These tunnels, a remnant of the city's ancient sewage system, had been repurposed generations ago to deliver fresh water to the palace gardens. As head gardener, Kedar had used them countless times to access different sections of the grounds. "It feels strange," he murmured as they descended into the musty darkness. "Returning as an enemy to a place I tended for so long." "Not an enemy," Nura corrected, her voice echoing softly off the clay walls. "A liberator." The tunnels narrowed as they approached the palace, forcing them to proceed in single file. Merrin led, followed by Darius and Tabor. Kedar kept Nura close behind him, with 2 resistance fighters bringing up the rears. They emerged in a tool shed, nestled among flowering bushes in the western gardens. Kedar's former domain, the familiar scents of jasmine and night-blooming cereus, brought a rush of memories. Here he had spent countless hours pruning, planting, nurturing. Here he had first spoken with Samira, the noble woman who would become his secret love. "The servants' quarters are through that archway," he whispered, orienting himself. "Most will be attending the midday prayer ceremony in the great temple." Moving with the confident gait of palace workers going about their duties, they crossed the garden to a service entrance. Inside, the corridors were largely deserted, confirming Kedar's prediction. "The vizier's private chambers are in the eastern wing," Merrin informed them. "But he'll be at the temple now, leading prayers for the emperor's recovery." "And the emperor himself?" Darius asked. "Confined to the healing tower. None but the vizier and his personal physicians are permitted entry." Their first objective was the Imperial Archive, a repository of official documents, where evidence of the vizier's treachery might be found. Located deep within the administrative wing, it was guarded by a single drowsy clerk, who succumbed quickly to the sleeping draught, slipped into his tea by one of their companions. Inside the archive they worked swiftly, searching through stacks of parchment and leather-bound ledgers. Darius, with his knowledge of imperial record-keeping, directed their efforts toward the vizier's personal correspondence. "Here," he said finally, withdrawing a slim journal bound in red leather, "Maktar's private record. It bears his seal." While the others continued searching, Kedar flipped through the journal's pages. Most entries were mundane administrative notes, but a pattern emerged in the margins, a series of notations regarding the emperor's health, tracking a steady decline over many months. "He's been poisoning him," Kedar realized, finding a list of substances and dosages, slowly, methodically, making it appear a natural decline. Their discovery was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Quickly returning documents to their proper places, they retreated to a storage alcove, just as 2 imperial scribes entered, deep in whispered conversation. "The vizier expects the announcement tomorrow," one was saying. "The coronation will follow immediately." "So soon, before the ceremonial week ends?" He claims ancient precedent, with no direct heir. The empire cannot remain leaderless. When the scribes departed, Mirren turned to Kedar with urgency. We must move quickly. If Maktar is crowned, even proof of his crimes may not be enough to unseat him. Their next target was the vizier's private study, a chamber Kedar had glimpsed only from the adjoining garden. According to Mirren, it contained not only state documents, but objects of magical significance collected from conquered territories. He studies ancient powers, the former guard explained. Some say his interest in your daughter stems from these studies. The route to the eastern wing took them through the palace's grand corridor, a risk, but necessary to reach their destination quickly. They timed their crossing to coincide with the changing of the temple guards, when attention would be directed elsewhere. Halfway across the exposed passage, disaster struck. A side door opened unexpectedly, and a procession of nobles emerged, minor courtiers returning from the temple. At their head walked a palace official who had overseen the gardens during Kedar's service. Recognition dawned instantly in the man's eyes. The banished gardener, he gasped, backing away. Guards, intruders, everything happened at once. Tabor disabled the official with a swift blow. Darius engaged the nearest guard. Kedar pushed Nura behind a decorative column as more soldiers appeared from adjoining corridors. Go, Mirren shouted to Kedar, drawing his concealed blade. We'll hold them here. Complete the mission. Grabbing Nura's hand, Kedar fled down a servant's passage he remembered from his years of service. Behind them, the sounds of combat echoed through the marble halls. The vizier's study is this way, he whispered, guiding Nura through the labyrinthine palace. They reached the ornate doors just as alarm bells began to ring throughout the palace. Inside, the chamber was a testament to imperial excess, gilded furnishings, rare artifacts, walls lined with scrolls and codices from conquered lands. Look for anything about the emperor's condition or the prophecy, Kedar instructed, securing the door behind them. As they searched frantically, Nura approached a pedestal in the room's center. Upon it sat a crystal orb, swirling with strange mists. Father, she called softly. This feels familiar. Before Kedar could respond, voices sounded in the corridor outside. The door handle turned against its barricade. Hide, he hissed, gesturing toward a heavy curtain concealing a garden entrance. As Nura slipped behind the velvet drapes, the door burst open. Imperial guards poured in, weapons drawn, and behind them, resplendent in ceremonial robes, stood Vizier Maktar himself. The gardener returns to his master's house, he observed, cold amusement in his voice. How predictably sentimental. Guards seized Kedar before he could reach his weapon. The vizier circled him slowly, examining his former slave with cold curiosity. 40 years I watched you tend these gardens, Maktar mused. So meek, so obedient. Who could have imagined the son of Kedar lurked beneath that humble exterior? And who could have imagined a poisoner beneath the vizier's robes? Kedar countered, nodding toward the journal still clutched in his hand. Maktar's smile tightened as he snatched the red leather book. Accusations from a slave. How novel. He turned to the captain of his guard. Search the room. He would not have come alone. Kedar silently prayed that Nara would remain hidden, that some opportunity for escape might present itself. But the guards were thorough, checking every alcove, every shadow. When they pulled aside the heavy curtain, Kedar's heart sank. Yet the space behind was empty. Somehow Nara had vanished. A small draught from the garden doorway suggested how the child eludes us still, Maktar observed, noting Kedar's momentary relief. No matter. She will not abandon her father. Bound in heavy chains, Kedar was marched through the palace corridors to the great courtyard where imperial justice was traditionally dispensed. Word of his capture had spread quickly. Nobles and servants alike lined the passages, staring at the former gardener now revealed as a desert rebel. In the courtyard, a platform had been hastily erected. Upon it stood an ancient set of restraints, ceremonial chains embedded with precious stones, used only for the most significant public trials. The chains of judgment, Maktar announced, as Kedar was secured to the platform. Last used when your father was captured, after Akat's fall. How fitting they should serve again for his son. A crowd gathered as palace heralds summoned the city to witness imperial justice. Kedar scanned their faces, searching for allies. He glimpsed Tabor and Darius among a group of captives at the courtyard's edge, bloodied but alive. Of Mirin and the others, there was no sign. The vizier addressed the growing assembly, his voice carrying across the hushed space. Behold the architect of rebellion, a slave who dared raise his hand against the empire that fed and clothed him for 40 years. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many recognized the quiet gardener who had been a fixture in the palace grounds for decades. This man, Maktar continued, not content with his own treason, stole a child of noble blood, a ward of the imperial household, filling her mind with seditious ideas. Lies, Kedar called out, his voice stronger than expected. The child is my daughter, born of love between myself and Lady Samira. Gasps and whispers erupted from the assembly. The vizier's face darkened with anger. Blasphemy! You dare claim the blood of House Jalani flows in common veins. I claim only the truth, Kedar replied. A truth you have worked hard to conceal. Just as you conceal the slow poisoning of our emperor. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Guards moved to silence Kedar. But Maktar waved them back, his composure quickly restored. The ravings of a desperate man, he said dismissively. Our beloved emperor suffers a natural decline, as all men must. Even now, I lead prayers for his recovery. Show the people his journal, Kedar challenged. Let them read the careful records of poison administered day by day. For a moment, uncertainty flickered in the crowd. A nobleman stepped forward, an elderly councillor Kedar recognized from Samira's circle. These are serious accusations, the old man said. Perhaps we should examine this evidence before proceeding. The word of a slave against that of the imperial vizier, Maktar scoffed. What next? Shall we consult the palace hounds on matters of state? Laughter rippled through the courtiers, but Kedar noted many common citizens remained silent, watching with thoughtful expressions. I was not always a slave, Kedar said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. I was born Kedar, son of Kedar, war chief of Aket. I was taken as a child when your armies destroyed my city, my identity buried beneath decades of servitude. The elderly councillor frowned. Aket fell nearly 50 years ago. You expect us to believe. Look at him, interrupted a grizzled imperial veteran near the front of the crowd. I fought in that campaign. The resemblance to Kedar is unmistakable. More whispers spread through the assembly. Maktar's expression hardened as he sensed the shifting mood. Enough of this spectacle, he snapped. The punishment for treason is death. The sentence will be carried out immediately, without the emperor's seal, challenged the elderly councillor. Even in times of emergency, proper procedure must be observed. The emperor is incapacitated, Maktar replied coldly. As his vizier, act with full authority. Then show us the imperial decree granting you such powers. The old man persisted. The law is clear. Only with the emperor's written consent may the vizier order an execution. Others in the crowd began to voice similar concerns. The vizier's carefully constructed narrative was unraveling thread by thread. In the moment of confusion, Kedar caught a flicker of movement on the rooftop, overlooking the courtyard. A small figure in a servant's cloak watched from the shadows. Nura, her face partially visible, as she surveyed the scene below. Maktar, following Kedar's gaze, spotted her as well. There, he shouted to his guards. The child! Seize her! As soldiers rushed toward the building, a commotion erupted at the courtyard's main entrance. The great doors burst open, admitting a stream of desert warriors led by the tribal chieftain. They had breached the city walls, following the plan to converge on the palace if the infiltration team failed to return. For Akich came the battle cry as they engaged the Imperial Guards. In the chaos, Tabor and Darius broke free, fighting their way toward the platform where Kedar remained chained. The Vizier, seeing his carefully laid plans dissolving into open combat, drew a ceremonial dagger from his robes. "If I cannot have the child," he hissed, advancing on Kedar with murderous intent, "I will at least end the bloodline of Kedar." As the blade descended, a column of flame erupted between them. Nura stood at the edge of the platform, her small hands extended, eyes bright with power that seemed to flow from some ancient source beyond her years. "Leave my father alone," she commanded, her voice echoing with unnatural resonance across the suddenly silent courtyard. The courtyard fell silent as flames danced around Nura's small form. Even the battle paused momentarily, warriors and Imperial guards alike transfixed by the child wreathed in impossible fire that burned without consuming. "The prophecy," whispered voices in the crowd. "The child of two worlds." Maktar recovered first, his face contorting with rage and fear. "Seize her," he commanded his personal guard. "Use the binding chains." Two soldiers rushed forward, bearing silver manacles inscribed with strange symbols. Nura's flames flared higher, what the men pressed through, their enchanted armor offering some protection against her magic. Tabor intercepted one guard, his massive form barreling into the soldier with bone-crushing force. The other reached Nura, the binding chain extended toward her small wrist. "No." Kedar strained against his restraints, links creaking under the pressure of his desperation. What happened next would be recounted for generations. As the enchanted manacle touched Nura's skin, a pulse of energy erupted from the point of contact. The guard was thrown backward, his armor glowing red-hot. The silver chain melted like wax, dripping through his fingers as he screamed. Above the chaos, a bell began to toll, not the alarm bells from earlier, but the deep, resonant chime of the Emperor's bell, rung only to announce matters of greatest significance. All eyes turned toward the palace's central tower. There, on the imperial balcony, stood a figure that few had seen in months. The Emperor himself, frail and supported by two attendants, but unmistakably alive. "My loyal subjects," his voice carried weakly across the suddenly hushed courtyard, "I have been deceived." At his side appeared the elderly counselor who had questioned the vizier's authority, now revealed as the imperial physician. His Majesty was administered a slow-acting poison, the physician announced, "the effects of which we have finally counted." Maktar's face drained of color. "Impossible," he hissed. The dosage was precise. Only those nearest heard this damning admission, but it was enough. The vizier's personal guard hesitated, their loyalty visibly wavering. Taking advantage of the distraction, Darius reached Kedar, producing a key taken from a fallen jailer. The chains of judgment fell away with a symbolic clang that echoed across the stone courtyard. Freed, Kedar moved immediately to Nura's side, placing a protective arm around her shoulders as her flames subsided. The Emperor's gaze found them among the crowd. "The child," he wheezed. "Bring her to me." Imperial guards moved to obey, then halted, uncertain, as desert warriors closed protectively around Kedar and Nura. For a moment, the courtyard balanced on the edge of renewed violence. "We will go," Kedar decided, his voice carrying the authority of his bloodline, but not as prisoners. With desert chieftains flanking them and Tabor and Darius as vanguard, they ascended the palace steps. Maktar, seeing his plans unraveling, made one final desperate move. "The child is an abomination," he shouted, drawing a concealed weapon, not a conventional blade, but a crystalline dagger that pulsed with unnatural light. A threat to the natural order, he lunged not at Kedar or Nura, but at the Emperor himself, revealing his true ambition. The old ruler, weakened by months of poisoning, could not evade the attack. Nura reacted instinctively. Fire leapt from her hands, interposing between the vizier and his target. Yet Maktar pushed through the flames, his ceremonial robes burning away to reveal intricate arcane symbols tattooed across his skin, protective sigils that granted him resistance to magical energy. "You are not the only one who has studied the old powers," he snarled as he closed on the Emperor. In that crucial moment, Kedar made the choice that would define the remainder of his life. Placing himself between the vizier and the Emperor, he met Maktar's enchanted blade with his own body. The crystalline dagger struck his shoulder, sending waves of arcane energy coursing through his flesh. Yet instead of falling, Kedar grasped the vizier's wrist with inexorable strength. "For 40 years," he said through gritted teeth, "I bowed to you, no more." With his free hand, Kedar drove his own blade up. The simple steel found its mark beneath Maktar's ribs, piercing the heart that had conceived so much cruelty. The vizier's eyes widened in disbelief, then darkened as life fled. As he collapsed, the enchanted dagger, still embedded in Kedar's shoulder, shattered, releasing a burst of energy that knocked everyone nearby to the ground. When the dust settled, Nira was the first to rise, rushing to her father's side. Kedar lay motionless, the broken dagger hilt protruding from his wound, strange energies still crackling around the entry point. "Father," she cried, small hands hovering over the injury. The Emperor, helped to his feet by attendants, approached slowly. "Child," he said softly, "your father has saved my life at great cost to his own." Nira looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Help him, please." The imperial physician knelt beside Kedar, examining the wound with grave concern. The blade was imbued with death magic, he said, "ancient and forbidden. I have no remedy for such a weapon." "I do," Nira whispered. Closing her eyes, she placed her hands directly on her father's wound. Instead of the fierce protective flames from before, a gentle golden light emanated from her palms, flowing like liquid sunshine into Kedar's injury. The courtyard watched in hushed awe as the broken blade fragments rose from the wound, suspended in Nira's healing light, before crumbling to dust. The ragged flesh beneath began to knit together, color returning to Kedar's ashen features. His eyes fluttered open, focusing immediately on his daughter's tear-streaked face. "Nira," he breathed. "The prophecy is fulfilled," came Zara's voice, as the old nomad woman made her way through the crowd. In her hands she held the ancient scroll from Akhet. "When darkness covers the land, a child of mixed blood shall command the element. Chains shall break, and the desert mother will walk again among her people." The Emperor, witnessing these events with increasing clarity as the poison's effects continued to fade, made a momentous decision. "The Empire has lost its way," he announced, his voice stronger than before. "Perhaps it is time for new leadership. Leadership that understands both imperial and desert traditions." His gaze settled on Kedar, now sitting upright with Nira at his side. "The son of Kedar has proven his worth today, and the child," he gestured to Nira, "has demonstrated wisdom and power beyond her years." From his neck the Emperor removed the imperial crown, a simple circlet of gold that symbolized absolute authority over the known world. "A new age begins," he declared, extending the crown toward Kedar, "one where the desert and the empire may finally know peace." The imperial crown gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, its simple gold band belying the immense power it represented. Kedar looked at it with mingled awe and trepidation, aware that all eyes in the courtyard were fixed upon this moment of decision. Slowly, he raised his hand, not to accept the crown, but to gently close the Emperor's fingers back around it. "I was born to the desert," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed assembly, "and I have served in your palace. I understand both worlds, but I am not meant to rule either." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd. The Emperor's expression reflected confusion, then gradual understanding. "What would you have him do?" he asked, genuine humility in his tone, perhaps for the first time in his long reign. Kedar turned to face the gathered witnesses, imperial nobles, desert chieftains, common citizens, all united in this unprecedented moment. For generations, the empire has ruled by force, treating the desert peoples as lesser beings to be conquered rather than equals to be embraced. His gaze swept across faces from both worlds. This division has brought suffering to all. The time has come for a new covenant. From within his tunic, Kedar withdrew the twin stone keys of Akhet, the ancient artifacts that had survived decades of imperial rule. Waiting for this moment, let the empire and the desert stand as equal partners in a greater union, he proposed. Each with its own traditions, its own governance, yet bound together in common purpose. The emperor considered this radical suggestion, his frail hand still clutching the crown. And who would lead such a union, if not you? Kedar looked down at Nura, who stood quietly at his side. The future belongs to those who can bridge our divisions. My daughter carries the blood of both worlds, desert chieftain and imperial nobility. One day, she may be ready for such responsibility. But until then, pressed the elderly counselor. Until then, Kedar replied, I will serve as regent for the desert territories, answerable to a council representing all tribes, and you, emperor, might rule your territories with greater wisdom, advised by those who understand the cost of tyranny. 3 days later, in the great temple of Zarahm, the covenant was formally established. The emperor, recovered enough to stand unaided, set aside his crown, accepting the title of first counselor of the imperial territories. Kedar, dressed not in slave's garb, nor in royal finery, but in the simple white robe of a free citizen, was named regent of the United Desert Lands. As the ceremony concluded, imperial heralds released white doves into the sky, a traditional symbol of new beginnings. Simultaneously, desert drummers performed the ancient rhythm of tribal unification, their beats echoing off marble walls more accustomed to imperial hymns. Later, as celebrations continued throughout the city, Kedar found a moment of quiet in the palace gardens he had tended for so many years. The jasmine was in bloom, its sweet scent bringing memories of Samira, her gentle voice, her courage, her foresight that had set all these events in motion. She would be proud, said Zara, approaching with Nura. The old nomad woman looked strangely at home in the palace setting, her desert robes adding welcome color to the formal surroundings. I wish she could have seen this day, Kedar replied, a familiar ache in his chest. She knew it would come, Nura said with childlike certainty. That's why she saved me, why she sent me to find you. A comfortable silence fell as they contemplated all that had changed in the weeks since. A small girl had chased after a banished slave at the edge of the desert. What happens now? Nura finally asked. Kedar smiled gently. Now comes the harder part. Building is always more difficult than destroying. The covenant is just words until we make it reality. Already, challenges loom. Some imperial nobles resisted sharing power with those they had long considered inferior. Some desert chieftains called for vengeance rather than reconciliation. The vizier's supporters, though diminished, plotted in shadows, yet for every voice of division, others embraced the new vision. Imperial merchants established trading posts in desert settlements. Desert healers shared ancient knowledge with imperial physicians. Children of both worlds played together in streets once segregated by birth and blood. Will they accept me? Nura asked, watching a group of such children from the garden terrace. When they learn what I can do, some will fear you, Kedar acknowledged honestly. Others will try to use you. Many will love you, just as people have always responded to those who are different. He knelt to her level, taking her small hands in his. But you will never face it alone, and you will always know who you truly are, not just a child of prophecy, but my daughter. Tears glistened in Nura's eyes as she threw her arms around his neck. Over her shoulder, Kedar saw Tariq standing at the garden's edge, watching them with his usual impassive expression. The hunter had disappeared during the final confrontation, only to return voluntarily the following day. To everyone's surprise, he had pledged his service to the new regency, claiming that he followed strength, not titles. Whether he could be trusted remained to be seen, but his presence was a reminder that the past could not simply be erased. It must be acknowledged, understood, perhaps even forgiven. As the sun set over Zarahm, its golden light touched the highest spires of the imperial palace and the furthest tents of the desert encampments now established within the city walls. For the first time in centuries, no walls, physical or otherwise, separated the two peoples who shared this land. Kedar lifted Nura onto his shoulders as they walked from the gardens to join the evening celebrations. Behind them stretched the path that had brought them here, a journey from slavery to leadership, from separation to unity. Before them lay a future full of challenges, but also hope. "Look, Father," Nura pointed to where desert constellations began to appear in the darkening sky. "The stars are the same, whether you view them from the palace or the sands." "Yes," Kedar agreed, finding profound wisdom in her simple observation. "They always have been."